So nothing makes me feel more present and progressing than a banana cream pie. And I know we're going to start there because my wife made me one last night, and it was unbelievable. She made me one a couple weeks ago, or for our whole family. It wasn't just for me. I kind of feel like it's just for me, but it was. She wasn't happy with it, and I was like, it was great. It was great, and she wasn't happy with it, so she had to make another one last night. And nothing makes me feel more present than that first bite of that banana cream pie. And I think the progress part is it just gives me energy to go into my day. And there's nothing wrong with having banana cream pie for breakfast, is there? I mean, we eat donuts, so why wouldn't we do that? So let's jump right in. Presence versus progress, the paradox here. I once heard it said that human beings are the only species on Earth that speeds up when we're lost. I have no idea if that's actually true, but it sure sounds right. The more off track, out of bounds, missing the point, or off the grid we feel, the faster we move. The less we stop, and the more we focus on the end goal as our primary objective. Moving fast and making progress sometimes, I think, gets a bad rap, however. Progress and getting it done matters. We're wired for it. And it's hard to argue against the idea that progress, measurement, and personal and organizational achievement are not only a part of our created way, they are. It's not that progress, I think, is the great devil, but that it so often overwhelms our capacity to be present in the moment. And it's not only our future orientation that gets, so think about this, it's not only our future orientation that gets in the way of our presence, it's also our past orientation that causes some of us to think so long about where we've been that we miss where we are. Now that kind of blew my brain, that alone. Is like, it's not just about moving forward, but it's also sometimes put in a reverse that actually may cause us to not be present. Everything in our culture moves with the intention of the tortoise and the urgency of the hare. Our economic structures are built on the necessity for development and growth. And think about this, in our gross national product and increasing customer spending. While we all know that saving and pausing and just being is just as important as moving forward. And if you didn't know it, this is what was always fascinating to me, from my times on university campuses, is that economics is most often thought of as a social science and not as a business topic. It's really interesting. Our economies impact us socially and even individually. So that's kind of interesting to think through. As I've had the chance to live alongside mentors who have moved into their 70s and their 80s and their 90s, so often their challenge is one of being okay with slowing down. While retirement is in some ways, I would suggest a cultural construction of a time when we stop working so hard at moving forward, it's not always that easy. When we push all our lives, the reality of those deeply entrenched habits is that those deeply entrenched habits, it comes face to face with the reality that we can no longer produce and grind the way we used to. My dad is 91, and he's now talking about one of the things that's challenging him is he's written, I think, 46 books, and he's really struggling to write. And so to execute and move forward on even publication has been something my dad's kind of facing in his retirement years. But he's 91 too, still going on. And for many, there's a realization that retirement from our careers doesn't mean a retirement from the reality that we have more to do. Even if more to do may be less about us and more about our investment in the next generation. The point I'm trying to make is this, is that we struggle with being present at all phases of life and work and in many different ways. How deeply do you feel the necessity for being present with others? I'm hard pressed to think of any leader or any person I've come in contact with over my lifetime who doesn't want to be more present in the moment. Being present is about living, breathing, thinking, and relating to others right now in real time. Man, it's personal. Living in a full send culture where half the message is go and go big time makes it really hard to come to a full stop and be present in the moment. Living living a whole and this is, I'm sorry, it's preaching at me. So it's like living a whole and intentional life requires us to live in the here and now while pushing forward with the necessary urgency. Being present in the moment while pushing for measurable progress is a fundamental, this is kind of the key point for today, a fundamental and necessary paradox in our whole and real journey. And that's what we're trying to be about here. Millions, if not billions, of book copies have been sold on the oversimplified idea of being present. Here's what's also interesting. Another billion books have probably been sold on what it means to achieve and get it done. Very few have been written about our reality that living in the present and fully being present is always in a healthy tension with moving forward. To get it right, we've got to face these two competing expectations we have for ourselves and for others and figure out what it means to do both. And our responsibility for being present and progressing isn't likely our responsibility alone. This is kind of something that's convicting to me. It's something we do together. What if we were mindful of the pressure we put on others to be present or to make progress? What would change that? So let's get into presence versus progress, because this is just, this week, even thinking about this kind of blew my brain apart. That's the goal, right? Dr. Halleck, blow our brains apart. So to make progress is to focus on urgency, on motivation, on goals, on habits, measurement, grind, grit, owning it, and on getting there with efficiency. To be present is to be here now, to live in the moment, live in this moment, to slow down and even stop and to see what's happening. Progress matters because it gives us a sense of completion, of momentum, and of a way of saying and seeing, well done. In contrast, presence is the fundamental building block. This is what's fascinating of our relationship to other people. If we're not present, can we ever really see someone else? If there were a relationship 101 class that we would all take, half the content would probably be about being present with other people and not wandering physically or mentally or emotionally away when we're with them. Being present isn't only necessary for relationships, but it's necessary for generating wisdom and discernment as we see what's really happening and not only where we're going. Here's the challenge. The challenge is that most practical guides to leading and living, and even the research surrounding the two, I'm going to get into that in a second, focus on one and not the other. Mindfulness and motivation are two examples. Most of the definitions, so I noticed a few years ago in our major guild in the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, that mindfulness came onto the map. This was a few years back. Most of the definition of mindfulness have to do with being present in the moment. Being mindful and aware of what's happening around us right now is a practice that has been shown to be correlated with some powerful things. This is the mindfulness part, including these things. Just listen to this list: well-being, empathy, self-determination, intuition, job satisfaction, resilience, and even loosely with task performance. Slowing down long enough to be aware of what's happening in the moment is clearly important, whether we call it meditation, prayer, cognitive reframing, coaching, or training. Moments to stop or even pause are all necessary. And now at the same time, imagine this. Imagine all that has been written and studied about goal setting, effective habits, motivation, and the power of taking action and control. We know it's important. We aren't talking about it a lot right now, but we know it's important. Research hasn't, so I'm going to get a little researchy for a second. Research hasn't made it any easier for us to understand the paradoxical tension between making progress and being present. Most psychological research focuses on, so listen, I'm going to go variable talk for just a second. Most psychological research focuses on the power of one variable in impacting another variable, or the interaction between two variables, so the interaction that they have, or the additive power of one variable on top of another. So our most common way of thinking about being present or progressing, according to like the research would encourage in us, would be to look at the power of presence or progress on their own separately, to consider their multiplicative impact when we multiply them together, or to see whether or not one on top of the other is the secret recipe. As far as I know, at this point in my life and career as a scientist and a person, we don't have very good mathematical ways to measure the paradoxical reality that presence and progress are both aspired realities that oftentimes compete with one another while both being necessary. Notice that I didn't label them as both being good, because they each can be used, I think, for good or for something that's not so good. Even further, while there is some evidence that some of us actually embrace competing tensions in our personality, there is some interesting evidence. I heard it recently said that in one particular organization, they have a tool, and 9% of the people ended up being this weird thing where they were like these tension things going on. The reality is that all of us wrestle with between making progress and movement and being present in the moment. So, okay. So some of you are going like, what's the goal? What's the goal, McKenna? Is the goal to be present? Is the goal to make progress? Is the goal to see how they work together, like that interaction? Or is the goal to embrace the tension and avoid our default tendency? I think some of the most interesting work that may help us navigate the paradox of progress and presence is the work of Albert Bandura. Yeah, we're going there. The Canadian psychologist. Some of you are going to want to read some of old Albert's work. Bandura's social learning theory, it has the necessary complexity to at least begin our process of living now and pushing forward. So I'm going to describe this to you. Social learning theory is a powerful way to think about the determinants of human behavior and learning. Bandura describes that any change requires a shift in our thinking and our behaviors, as well as a deeper understanding of the environmental factors that are impacting us. So this is going to go organizational, even though that maybe where your brain was going. From that perspective, understanding paradox and the things we're doing that cause us to either be present or moving are important. And just as important are the environmental or organizational factors in that, impacting our perceptions of what is appropriate to do and to think and to do. Okay, so first of all, the cognitive level. What we think about matters, and according to Bandura, and accepting that paradox and tension are the reality of our lives is a start. That sounds like it's too simple, but it's true. It's a start, and we don't encourage that to do that all the time. That may sound easy, but we have few people encouraging us to live in that tension, and more who are either telling us to get going or to stop. Behaviorally, it's difficult. So this is the second part. Behaviorally, it's difficult for most of us to stop and to be present and to go at the same time. How many times have you driven down a freeway? So think about this. And you've driven down a freeway that you've driven down 1,000 times without noticing much until the moment where the traffic stops. Suddenly you notice that grass is growing on the concrete median, or a farmhouse was built right alongside the freeway. Our actual action of stopping or going is probably one of the most fundamental predictors of us being present or making progress. And from an organizational perspective, think about this. Leaders, as the architects of culture, bear the responsibility for encouraging the norms that allow us to stop and see what's happening while being present. While being present for the moments when urgency, grit, and getting it done become primary. The movement from presence to progress often requires us to stop or to go within the same day or even hour. We see this, right? What if our organizations encourage us to be ready to move forward and generate momentum while also being ready to pause and to see each other? And here's what I also want to suggest. This is our responsibility. So this is most of us probably have a default. While some of us are doers, others of us are just really good at being present in the moment. And without intention, we will likely migrate to our default to either take action or to meditate, even in situations where others may need us to do something different than our compulsion. The challenge is this is where it gets personal, is that when someone points out our default, it doesn't always go well. If you don't believe me, just think of the last time someone said to you, "You just don't seem like you're with me," or "Where are you right now?" And for those who default to being present, when was the last time you heard someone say, "Can you even make a decision?" Or would it really help? Or it would really help me if you took some initiative. These are just fun little conversations I've had over the years. Living well into the tension between presence and progress sometimes require us to identify those defaults, feel affirmed for the strength, and be willing to sacrifice ourselves or our ego for the sake of others' needs. I want to wrap this up and get our conversation going. As someone who has invested my life and career in the possibility that we could be both present and more often and progressing on purpose, this is personal. It really is. I've spent my entire adult life in the process of building tools for whole and intentional leader development. Tools that cause us to stop and to pause to see one another, to see the team members we work with, to identify our competency and their competency, to see what others have on their hearts, and how what's on their hearts comes directly into contact with their capacity to perform, to make progress, and to thrive in their work. Tools that give you the moment to pause and become cognitively aware, as Bandura would describe, while also giving you measures of progress and actions to take. The fight we face against culture to help leaders and organizations to do that is significant. To get a team to even take 60 minutes a month to pause and see one another can be surprisingly difficult. But what would change in our capacity to not only grow our organizations, but to grow them well if we structured those moments to pause as pit stops in our progress? The impact we have already seen is huge, like from our work. Most personal and leader development solutions aren't systematic pauses that transcend the years, but are flavors of the month, Daniel says this all the time, that are meant to help us feel good, but do little to actually change the fundamental cultures we're creating as leaders. A friend recently asked me, what is the number one reason that leaders fail to use the WiLD Toolkit as their ongoing leader and people development system year after year? And I said, we struggle as human beings to pay attention and to be present long enough to make that longer lasting difference. But I went on to say that the difference we're seeing with leaders and organizations we serve is profound. They're moving forward, sometimes really fast, but they're moving forward with intention and presence in the moment. So where do we begin? Bandura social learning theory is a nice place to start. So you're saying, like, some of you are like, tell me where to start. In terms of our thinking, never think of being present without consideration of the progress that may be necessary. Call it what it is when we need it. And be open to the needs of others when they require something different. Behaviorally, practice moments of both. Knowing when we're present and when we're progressing is the thinking part, and the behavior should follow. And then organizationally, this is Bandura talks about the environment. Our environment is these organizations that we architect, whether we're talking about a home or a business, set up a structure and make explicit statements about how we will work and be present while pushing for progress. In my own organization, in WiLD Leaders, we have an aspirational document called a culture charter. And my hope is that all in our organization would say it is real to who we are, we're trying to be. Structure moments to be present. This is my final thought: to see one another and to see ourselves. Contract with others, letting them know, now we're in neutral, or now we're in park, or now we're in drive, or now we're in reverse. Just like a car has explicit gears, calling out that both are realities and being intentional about whether we're stopping or moving is probably where it likely begins. So let's keep talking. Let's go.